Freedom flight. Remember that phrase? It was the headline everyone attached to the moment Harry and Meghan left the UK in 2020. It carried a certain excitement and emotional punch. The story was simple: two people breaking away from something massive and restrictive, escaping an institution that, according to their version of events, had failed to protect and properly support them. They traded centuries of royal duty and pressure for the sunshine, freedom, and promise of California. Back in 2020, for a large part of the global audience, the narrative worked. It felt believable. It felt compelling. The Oprah interview was still ahead. The Netflix series, the memoir, everything about their exit looked like the start of a bold new chapter. Fast forward 5 years, and that same phrase hits very differently. Frogmore Cottage is being renovated. Not, reportedly, to roll out the welcome mat for their return, but to quietly wipe away the traces they left behind.
The final traces of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from the British royal family are being erased, and this is far more significant than just the destruction of their former home.
The changes are being rolled back, the rooms are being restored to their original pre-Sussex layout, and the £2 million royal-funded renovation is being carefully dismantled piece by piece. And right alongside that comes a detail that has royal watchers raising their eyebrows. One source claimed that even Prince Andrew, a man not exactly spoiled for housing options these days, looked at Frogmore and decided it just was not for him. So here we are. Freedom flight now collides with an empty cottage being transformed back into what it was before Harry and Meghan ever arrived. That is the picture in 2025. And according to a source cited in royal commentary this week, even Prince Andrew was offered the property and turned it down, with the widely repeated observation that the place had been sitting vacant for 3 years and that even Andrew apparently did not consider it suitable to live in.
A huge blow-up, a big fight around Harry's plans for summer return to the UK, including spending time at Balmoral, potentially, and reconnecting with the...
Two images now sit side by side, a freedom flight and a cottage that seemingly nobody wants. It may not be the most explosive visual in the Sussex saga, but it could be one of the most revealing. Tonight, we are unpacking every piece of it. What is reportedly happening at Frogmore, and what these very specific renovation decisions may actually be signaling. The Geneva appearance, and the unexpected details that ended up stealing the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. The ongoing security battle and why its importance goes far beyond the courtroom. Then there is the Project Thaw reconciliation narrative, and why it keeps crashing into the same brick wall despite endless headlines. There is also the growing tension between Harry's reported wish to reconnect and the practical reality of what the Sussex brand currently requires. And beneath all of it sits a larger question: has the freedom that was supposed to replace royal life truly delivered everything it promised, and what has the price been? First, we head to Windsor, because Frogmore is where this story is physically unfolding right now. The cottage has a history that matters, and it is worth understanding before we look at what is reportedly happening today. Harry and Meghan moved in as senior working royals, and the renovation they carried out, funded by the institution at a reported cost of roughly £2 million, was modern, bright, and by most accounts, heavily influenced by Meghan's personal design choices. Every description from that period painted it as a home she had genuinely invested in, both emotionally and aesthetically. Even the kitchen became a talking point in discussions about Meghan's domestic style. The transformation of that property was never random or superficial. It was intentional, personal, and carefully shaped from beginning to end.
It seems, as it's been revealed through The Sun, that assessments are being made of the property to see if it can be split yet again into either multiple residences, and basically to erase every single trace of Harry and Meghan on the property. And that is a really fascinating...
After the departure, the property spent years sitting unused. Eventually, King Charles asked them to leave, and the keys were handed back to the Crown Estate. Since then, according to multiple published reports, the cottage has remained empty. No new residents, no major activity, no fresh purpose, just standing there untouched. But now, if the latest royal commentary is accurate, the royal household is not merely keeping it vacant, or quietly listing it for future use. Instead, resources are reportedly being directed toward undoing many of the changes made during the Sussex era. Upgraded systems, redesigned interiors, custom features. Reports suggest all of it is being carefully stripped back as part of a plan to restore the property to its earlier role as multiple staff residences, which is exactly what it was before the Sussexes moved in. What has royal watchers talking is not the renovation itself. Buildings are renovated all the time, and their purposes change. The real focus is the direction of the work. Rather than building on what was there, the effort appears aimed at reversing it, restoring what existed before the Sussex chapter began, and spending money to remove instead of add. Supporters see it as sensible and efficient property management. The cottage originally served as staff accommodation before being converted for royal use, so returning it to that purpose can easily be viewed as a practical financial and operational decision. Critics, however, see something more pointed. To them, the decision to spend money actively undoing Meghan's design choices instead of simply updating around them feels far more deliberate than routine maintenance.
Of course, there was a lot of criticism about what Harry and Meghan, let's say, did. They had to add a yoga room, a 5,000-pound copper tub, and all these sorts of things because Soho House, of course, was involved. I still am absolutely flummoxed by Meghan Markle's obsession with Soho House. I feel like I need to stay there one time and maybe, just maybe, I will understand, but I doubt it.
With every alteration being undone, the perception only grows that the royal household wants Frogmore to symbolize something completely different from the Sussex era. Not neutral. Not merely refreshed. But intentionally and unmistakably pre-Sussex in identity. Then there is the Prince Andrew angle. While Frogmore's future was being debated, reports suggested that Prince Andrew was offered the property as a potential alternative to Royal Lodge. He said no. And that decision carries more weight than it might seem at first glance. According to one widely discussed source, the cottage had sat empty for 3 years, and even Andrew reportedly did not view it as somewhere worth moving into. There is something striking about that observation. It tells a story without saying very much. Frogmore is not just vacant. It appears unwanted by someone who would arguably benefit most from having another place to live. That is a remarkably unusual situation for a property located on the Windsor estate, and it has quietly become one of the sharpest details in the ongoing debate about what Frogmore now represents. If you enjoy analysis that digs deeper than the headlines, make sure to hit that like button and join the conversation. It helps the channel reach more people who want the full picture, not just the surface story. Now, let's turn to Geneva, because the Geneva appearance perfectly illustrates a recurring problem in the Sussex story. The growing gap between intention and outcome that keeps showing up in both public relations efforts and media coverage.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are being erased from the history of Frogmore.
Meghan addressed the World Health Organization in Geneva, and supporters framed it as a significant opportunity to engage with global health policy at one of the highest institutional levels. The speech itself received coverage that recognized the importance of the platform. But as often happens in the Sussex story, critics quickly shifted attention elsewhere. Two details, in particular, have continued to dominate discussion ever since. The first was the audience size. One journalist who reportedly attended claimed turnout was noticeably lower than expected. The description that spread fastest, fair or not, was that there were barely enough people in the room to fill a British phone box. That remark raced through royal commentary circles and soon became one of the defining talking points surrounding the event. The Who is a major institution, and the appearance was officially scheduled. Yet the question of crowd size, rather than the speech itself, became the criticism that stuck. For many observers, what was visible inside the room proved easier to discuss than the policy issues being addressed from the stage. The second issue involved a photograph. Meghan was pictured alongside a foreign health official who had previously attracted public criticism over reported comments. Critics argued that a communications operation operating at the level the Sussex brand aspires to should have conducted routine background checks before allowing that image to happen. The criticism was not really about the meeting itself. Officials regularly interact at international gatherings and multilateral events. The debate centered on whether the vetting process that would normally prevent an uncomfortable photo opportunity was functioning properly. Both controversies point toward the same broader observation. Operating outside the palace system also means operating without the multiple layers of review that come with official royal engagements. Within the royal framework, every major appearance passes through numerous checkpoints. Communications teams, logistics experts, security advisors, and diplomatic protocol staff all play a role. Outside that structure, those safeguards are replaced by the people in the room making decisions and judgments in real time, and sometimes that difference becomes part of the story itself.
Initially, the house was actually subdivided into multiple sections because it was actually a residence for multiple staff members. So there was a process undertaken to redo the property, make it go from a multiple family residence to a single family residence. And of course, this was to the tune of millions of pounds. Some of those structural changes, these sorts of things, I'm sure were needed to upkeep a property.
Sometimes it takes just one overlooked detail for an entire event to be remembered for the wrong reason. What was meant to be the headline suddenly becomes a footnote, and the footnote becomes the story. Let me know your thoughts below. Was the Geneva appearance ultimately a win for Meghan, or did it become a missed opportunity? Now let's move to the security debate, because this issue has quietly become the key that unlocks almost every other part of Harry's relationship with the UK, even though it is rarely discussed that way. Most reporting on Harry's legal battles over security focuses on the legal questions themselves: what level of protection he deserves, what responsibilities fall on the Home Office, and what legal precedents the courts may establish. That framework is perfectly valid, but it can also distract from the bigger practical issue. The security debate is not simply about Harry's safety during a visit. It is about whether the conditions exist for his relationship with Britain, and by extension his family, to become something different from what it is today. Harry has repeatedly argued that security concerns directly affect his ability to spend time in the UK. His legal challenges over protection arrangements have been extensively documented through hearings, rulings, appeals, and public statements. His position remains straightforward. The risks facing him and his family do not disappear simply because he is no longer a working royal, and he argues that protection should be based on threat assessments rather than royal status. Critics see the situation differently. Their argument is that the level of protection Harry seeks is tied to the unique threat environment that comes with being a senior working member of the royal family. That environment, they argue, is partly created by the institution itself and by the visibility that role provides. Step away from that role, and the equation changes. The Crown still has obligations to protect citizens, but whether it must provide the same level of security associated with active royal duties is an entirely separate matter. The courts have not resolved that question in a way that satisfies Harry. Yet what makes the issue so significant is not the legal debate, it is the practical impact. Security is the gateway to everything else. If the issue were resolved, longer stays in the UK could become realistically possible. That would mean attending family gatherings, spending more time with King Charles during a period widely acknowledged as serious regarding his health, and creating opportunities for the kind of informal interactions that can slowly repair damaged relationships. All of that depends on Harry feeling secure enough to be in the country without constantly managing large-scale private security arrangements. That is why every update in the security dispute attracts so much attention. Deep down, the discussion is not really about security. It is about whether the door opens. Until it does, every conversation about reconciliation remains largely hypothetical. And speaking of reconciliation, the theory that quiet progress is happening behind the scenes has once again returned with renewed energy. It is worth examining carefully because there is a significant gap between what the evidence suggests and what some headlines imply. Variations of the reconciliation narrative have circulated for roughly the last 18 months, fueled by the same Project Thaw reporting framework frequently discussed across royal commentary. By now, the pattern is familiar. A sympathetic outlet publishes a story hinting at progress. A more skeptical outlet questions the sourcing. The commentary world splits into the same camps it occupied before the story even appeared. The cycle repeats with remarkable consistency. Yet the visible reality remains largely unchanged. There has been no major reunion, no public rapprochement, no breakthrough in legal disputes, and no obvious movement toward the reconciliation that friendlier reports continue to describe as just around the corner. The narrative has been repeatedly supported by sources close to the Sussex Circle and repeatedly challenged by commentators such as Bossoff and Frolic, who argue that the palace's internal attitude appears considerably colder than many published reports suggest. The disagreement between those interpretations remains unresolved. Meanwhile, the facts on the ground remain much the same. No significant reunion. No meaningful public repair of relations. No visible breakthrough. Supporters of the reconciliation theory point to several moments they believe suggest quiet progress. One commonly cited example involves Harry's public comments on issues such as anti-Semitism, where the timing and framing appeared to echo themes King Charles was emphasizing around the same period. To believers, those similarities hint at behind-the-scenes coordination, subtle signals, and a gradual effort to test public reaction before larger steps are taken. Skeptics counter that the explanation may be far simpler. Harry and King Charles share a family, a history, and similar instincts on certain issues. Both receive enormous media attention. Under that level of scrutiny, apparent patterns are bound to emerge. Whether those similarities represent deliberate coordination or simply shared values remains something the available evidence cannot conclusively answer. What most observers seem to agree on, however, is a much simpler version of the story. By multiple accounts, and judging from his reported behavior over several years, King Charles appears to want a relationship with his son. The picture that emerges is not one of hostility but of frustration and caution. According to reporting attributed to Paula Froelich and palace sources, Charles is a father dealing with a serious health battle who allegedly cannot comfortably be alone in a room with Harry because, from the palace perspective, any private conversation could potentially become material for a future interview, documentary, or publication. It is a striking and quietly heartbreaking image. Not a father rejecting reconciliation, but one who may genuinely want it while navigating personal and institutional complications that simple goodwill cannot overcome. Yet whenever discussions turn to why reconciliation has stalled, one name consistently appears: Prince William. As heir to the throne and, according to reports, the key figure managing the day-to-day Sussex relationship from the palace side, William's position largely determines what is realistically possible rather than what might be emotionally desirable. By most available accounts, his stance toward Harry hardened considerably after the release of Spare. One reported example continues to attract attention. According to various accounts, William phoned Harry in October 2025 and asked him to publicly correct what he viewed as inaccuracies surrounding Catherine's portrayal. The conversation allegedly ended with Harry saying he could not afford to dismantle the narrative he had spent years building. If that account is accurate, it may be one of the most revealing details in the entire reconciliation debate. Not because it demonstrates hatred or permanent damage, but because it highlights two people making very specific choices based on very different priorities. Those priorities currently do not align in a way that would allow meaningful progress. For Harry to regain the access to his father and to Britain that he reportedly wants, many observers argue something would need to change in the public narrative. That could mean a correction, a retraction, or some form of acknowledgement that parts of the story presented in the memoir, the Oprah interview, and the Netflix documentary may not have been entirely accurate. That is not a small request. The memoir became a global bestseller. The interview reached tens of millions of viewers. Publicly revisiting any of it would carry significant personal and reputational costs. From William's perspective, according to this line of thinking, any renewed proximity to the royal inner circle would require something Harry's public record since 2020 has not yet provided. Not a private apology. Not a quiet conversation between brothers. Something placed on the same public stage where the original claims were made. Both expectations are substantial. And so far either has been met. More importantly, the visible distance between those positions does not appear to be shrinking. That is why the reconciliation narrative, despite repeatedly resurfacing, has yet to produce any clear or measurable development. The desire for reconciliation may well exist, certainly on Charles's side according to many reports, and reportedly on Harry's as well. But the structural conditions required to make it happen still appear absent. Critics of the Project Thaw narrative, including Boshoff and Froelich from their respective perspectives, have argued that much of the coverage resembles hope being reported as news rather than actual developments being reported as fact. Adding another layer to the story are reports suggesting that Meghan has drawn a firm line regarding any return to life in Britain, particularly where the children are concerned. Various unverified accounts describe discussions in which the possibility of returning was considered and ultimately rejected. Whether those conversations happen exactly as reported is impossible to confirm, but the broader picture aligns with what has been publicly visible for years. California remains the center of gravity. The children's education, friendships, and daily lives are there. The brand is there. The infrastructure supporting its operations is there. The professional relationships that sustain the Sussex commercial enterprise, whatever form it currently takes, are there as well. Most importantly, the entire justification for leaving in the first place rested on the belief that California offered a better future. The idea was that the life created there would ultimately outweigh the cost of departure. Reversing any significant part of that decision, returning the children to Britain, exposing the family once again to intense UK media scrutiny, or moving closer to the very institutional dynamics they originally left behind, would require an entirely new justification. At the moment, there is little public evidence that such a justification is being built. If anything, the observable direction of travel over the past 5 years has continued moving away from Britain rather than back toward it. The direction of travel has been away, not back. Whatever Project Thaw headlines may suggest, that is the picture the publicly visible evidence continues to paint. And that brings us right back to freedom flight. 5 years later, the phrase that was once sold as a symbol of liberation now sits beside a Frogmore cottage that is being transformed back into what it was before Harry and Meghan ever arrived. The changes are not simply being left behind, they are being actively undone. Add to that a Geneva appearance where debate over the audience overshadowed the speech itself, a security battle that has yet to produce the outcome Harry wanted, and a reconciliation narrative that keeps colliding with the same obstacles every time it is measured against reality. To be fair, the Sussex operation generated serious numbers in its early years. The Netflix agreement, the Spotify deal, and the Penguin Random House contract were not minor achievements. These were massive commercial commitments made by organizations known for conducting extensive analysis before writing checks of that size. Netflix, Spotify, and Penguin Random House do not hand out 8-figure and 9-figure agreements on a whim. They evaluated the opportunity, attached specific values to it, and invested accordingly. Yet over the following 5 years, all three companies appeared to reassess that value proposition. That collective reassessment matters. It represents separate institutions reaching conclusions independently of one another. The original proposition centered on the royal connection, the access, the credibility, the titles, and the story those titles helped create. Since then, some of the biggest players in entertainment and publishing appear to have concluded that the commercial reality did not fully match the expectations that existed in 2020 and 2021. The figures that made sense at the beginning no longer seem justified by the results being delivered in 2025 and 2026. The security dispute. The Frogmore renovation. The reconciliation narrative. The Geneva appearance. Questions surrounding brand performance. On the surface, these look like entirely separate stories generating separate headlines. But beneath them all lies the same underlying tension. Harry stepped away from an institution that provided more than status. It provided identity, security, influence, and a deeply embedded connection to both his country and his family. Those benefits existed not simply because of who he was as an individual, but because of the role he occupied within the institution. The California years were meant to replace those things, or at least make them feel less important compared to what was being gained. Yet the evidence from 2025 and 2026 suggests that replacement has been incomplete. The pull of what was left behind has not disappeared. The sense of irrelevance that the original departure narrative implied would eventually arrive has not fully materialized. That does not automatically mean the decision was wrong. It simply suggests that the costs may have been larger and more complicated than originally anticipated. Some of those costs are relational. Some are institutional. Some are commercial. And the question of whether those costs can be managed over the long term continues to hang over every discussion surrounding the Sussex story. In many ways, the Frogmore renovation, the empty cottage, the unresolved security battle, and the reconciliation effort that never quite seems to arrive are all asking the same question. The freedom was real in the way that mattered most to Harry and Meghan when they left. But the institutional, commercial, and personal costs associated with that freedom appear to have accumulated in ways that were not fully reflected in the original promise. At this point, the debate is no longer about whether freedom flight was the right choice. That decision was made in 2020, and there is no indication that either Harry or Meghan intends to reverse it. The real question is what comes next. What is the next chapter actually built on now that the original commercial framework has narrowed? What would both sides need to do if the goal is to manage the damage rather than simply extend it? And does the pull Harry reportedly feels toward Britain and his family have any realistic path forward given the barriers that still exist? Based on what is publicly visible today, either the California operation nor the palace appears particularly close to answering those questions. 5 years after Freedom Flight, the cottage that once symbolized Harry and Meghan's place inside the royal world is being restored to what it was before they arrived. The modifications are being removed. The original layout is returning. And in the most literal sense possible, the chapter is being closed by the people carrying out the renovation. So what do you think? Is there still a realistic path toward meaningful reconciliation between Harry and the royal family, or have the obstacles grown so large that the distance is effectively permanent? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy deep dive royal analysis that goes beyond the headlines, subscribe to Palace Insider and make sure to hit the like button. It helps the channel grow and ensures these conversations keep going. As for the next chapter, we will be watching closely. And chances are, so will everyone else.